On January 13th, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie Randall left her apartment to quickly run to the laundromat. She had done this exact task many times before. The difference is that this time she never made it back home. Debbie was born on August 21st, 1962, in a town called Marietta, Georgia. Debbie was the youngest in her loving family of 4 with 2 older brothers. Unfortunately, shortly after Debbie's birth, her parents divorced, but her father remained involved in his kids' lives. A few years after the divorce, Debbie's mom married a man named Roy, and he became the kids' stepdad. They lived together in a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood near a military base. Debbie was a typical kid who loved hanging out with friends and playing basketball. Debbie also loved dolls. She had a large collection and spent a lot of time playing with them. On the date of her disappearance, when Debbie was 9 years old, she had dinner with her family. After dinner, her mom sent her to the laundromat as she had done many times before. She was supposed to keep an eye on the laundry while it ran through its cycle. One of her siblings was supposed to help her carry the laundry to the laundromat and then back home. The laundromat was only a short walk from the family's apartment, right across the street to be exact. So her mom wasn't worried about anything happening to her. Back then it was commonplace for parents to have their kids help with chores such as laundry. Debbie even made friends with the other girls at the laundromat. That day the girl's mom sent her older brother along, but he wasn't feeling well and wanted to watch his favorite TV show. So she decided to ask her husband to take the laundry instead, and Debbie went with him. She grabbed a box of detergent on her way out the door. Her stepfather dropped off the laundry, loaded it into 2 machines, and left. Debbie stayed to wait for the washing machine to finish. After the laundry was done, Debbie was supposed to walk home and ask someone to grab the clean clothes because she couldn't carry them alone. A short time later, Debbie's mom realized she hadn't returned yet, even though the clothes should have been done a while ago. Since it was getting dark outside, she and her husband decided to walk across the street to find her, but she wasn't there. The employee told them that Debbie had left a while ago and hadn't come back. Her mom started to worry and decided to walk around the neighborhood with her husband searching for the young girl. Not long into the walk, they noticed something strange. At a business not far from the laundromat, there was spilled detergent next to a car. Since the girl had been carrying a box of detergent, her mom immediately thought it could be from her. Debbie's mom and stepfather continued to search the parking lot and the surrounding area, but no more signs of her were found. Neighbors, who were close to the family, began to help in the search as well. But even with everyone's efforts, they weren't able to locate her. Debbie's mom finally decided to contact the police. The investigators examined the area in the parking lot where the laundry detergent was found and noticed their first potential lead. The detergent was mere inches from a parked car, and there were several clear fingerprints on its door. The prints were fresh and were located much lower than the handle. This seemed odd. The investigators thought that in this spot, an unknown perp might have grabbed Debbie and touched the car while doing so. They collected these prints and gave them to forensic experts while they began looking for the owner of the vehicle. They did this to confirm that the prints didn't belong to the owner. Having no other leads, the detectives started combing the streets trying to find more clues or witnesses. The employee at the laundromat told them that she hadn't noticed anyone suspicious. The young girl had been sitting and waiting for the wash to finish, then took her detergent and left the laundromat. She most likely went home to ask someone to help with the clothes. The detectives then found the first witness, whose statement changed the course of the investigation. 12-year-old Sandra and her friend were walking to the same laundromat carrying dirty clothes. Out of nowhere, they saw a man grabbing a girl in the middle of the street and pulling her into his car that was parked by the laundromat. The girl, Debbie, was screaming and trying to get away, but he slammed the door, got behind the wheel, and drove off. The man nearly hit the girl and her friend. One of the girls started shouting after the car, but he sped away. At the time, Sandra didn't realize she had just witnessed a kidnapping. She thought the unknown man was the girl's father or another relative picking her up. They thought she was screaming because she didn't want to go home yet, since she thought the girl just didn't want to go home. Sandra didn't tell any adults about what happened or report to the police. when she learned about Debbie's abduction from the police. She provided detectives with crucial information. Based on her description, the perp drove a dark pickup truck, likely a 1957 model by the way she described it. Sandra described the man as being young, white, and he had thick dark hair. The man wore a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another girl that was in the neighborhood said that she was standing outside her apartment when a dark pickup truck drove past the building. She originally thought it was her uncle, but when the driver stopped in front of her and looked at the girl, she realized it wasn't him. She too said it was a white man with medium-length dark hair. She also gave the detectives a few more details about his appearance. She mentioned that the man parked near their building, next to the car where the spilled laundry soap was found. A man who lived near the family's apartment was driving to the hospital to visit his wife. At one point on his drive, a dark truck, possibly a Dodge, nearly ran into him before recklessly driving off. He said that the man driving appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair. The most important part of his statement, however, was the fact that he also saw a girl in the truck who seemed to want out while the driver held her in her seat with one hand. After speaking with all the witnesses, the detectives had no doubt that the young girl had been abducted. They gave the information about the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units. A police sketch artist created a drawing based off of the witnesses' descriptions of the suspect. Some officers began looking for vehicles matching the description and verifying their owners. Others organized large searches for the young girl. Each following day, more volunteers and police from neighboring towns joined in the search for Debbie. Around 4,000 people in total were involved in the search. This set a record for the state of Georgia. The detectives continued to investigate people who were close to Debbie. This included all of her male neighbors, her stepfather, and her biological dad. Unfortunately, all of them were ruled out as suspects. Debbie's father, who lived in the same city not too far from her apartment, found out about her disappearance while he was at work, and he immediately joined in the search. Detectives checked previously convicted criminals living close to Debbie's home, but none of them proved to be their perpetrator. The meticulous search efforts lasted for more than 2 weeks without finding any trace of Debbie. This continued until January 29th, when some students joined the search teams and were sent to search a wooded area a few miles from Debbie's house. After around 5 hours in the dense woods, one of them noticed tracks on the ground leading from a trail into the thick forest. It looked as if something or someone had been dragged into the woods. After following the tracks and drag marks into the woods, for a while they stumbled upon a human body and immediately notified the detectives. They instantly realized that they had found the missing girl, Debbie Randall. When Debbie was found, she was wearing the same clothes her mother had said she was wearing on the day of her abduction, a light purple dress and a dark blue jacket with a hood. It was discovered, however, that her shoes were missing. She had socks on, but her light purple shoes were nowhere to be found. These shoes had been gifted to Debbie for Christmas, just a few weeks before she was abducted, and she was very attached to them. The young girl's body was handed over to medical experts, who concluded that she died from strangulation. Unfortunately, she had also been assaulted. They found a single dark hair on her body. Since DNA analysis not used yet, however, experts couldn't identify a suspect from the hair. The experts examined the hair under a microscope, and with the knowledge at the time, determined it belonged to a man between 15 and 30 years old. The girl's clothing was covered in dirt, and without any other leads, detectives had it examined more thoroughly. They called in a geologist and asked him to work with the forensics team. Working together, they found that some of the dirt contained a specific type of clay mined not far from their city. The geologist confirmed it was a unique northern Georgia clay that couldn't be found elsewhere. There were other dirt stains that were different than the ones that had the clay. They were traced back to a different type of clay mined by a local company, just 2 miles from where Debbie's body was discovered. After obtaining this information, detectives started to think that the perpetrator didn't kill Debbie immediately. The facts hinted at him bringing her to remote areas where these specific types of clay were found. It was probable that he first took her out of town where he assaulted her, then took her to mine where the second type of clay was being harvested, killed her, and then took her to the forest where he dragged Debbie's body behind the trees and left her. The facts supporting this theory were not only the clay traces, but the forensic analysis indicating the girl was already dead when she was left off the trail in the woods. If the suspect had killed Debbie where he left her, there would have been signs of a struggle around the area. The trace evidence on the ground from the trail to the trees also suggested that she was already dead when dragged. The clay mining sites were pretty remote and hard to access. This led to detectives speculating that the perpetrator might currently or in the past work at the sites. They reached out to the mining companies. A supervisor for one of them confirmed their suspicions. It was difficult to fathom someone unfamiliar with the area taking a young girl there. Even the employees sometimes struggled to make it through the vast areas. Police looked at the employees from both companies in question, trying to find someone that matched the description and had a similar vehicle. Unfortunately, it didn't lead to anything useful. They also had the fingerprints left on the car at the abduction site and compared them to all the employees from each company. The news of what happened to Debbie shocked the entire city. Thousands of people showed up at Debbie's funeral to bid her farewell. The police department continued their search to find the killer and bring him to justice. Unfortunately, no new leads were found. No matter how hard the police tried, they just kept running into dead end after dead end. Shockingly, this case remained unsolved for many years. Despite their lack of success, investigators continued to check on dozens of suspects, but they were never able to prove their involvement in the case. For the lead detective on the case, the young girl's abduction and murder remained a high priority throughout his entire career. The case began when he was just 19, and he had been involved in the search and investigation from day one. For many years, the man investigated every lead, scrutinized all the suspects, and eventually created a list of 4 men who he considered the most likely suspects. When the FBI created the DNA database, experts were able to extract a genetic profile of the suspect from the hair found on the girl's body. It was entered into the database, but no matches were found. This meant that the killer had either not been convicted of other serious crimes. If he did occur before DNA samples were being collected from criminals. In 2015, over 43 years since the abduction and murder, the case was reopened, and investigators decided to re-examine Debbie's clothing using modern technology. After all these years, it was still sealed in the evidence warehouse. They found biological evidence from an unknown male. Unfortunately, after sitting in storage for so long, it could only be used to get a partial profile. In 2018, the young girl's mother, who had hoped for decades to see the police finally arrest her daughter's killer and hold him accountable, gave an interview. She stated that after Debbie's murder, she couldn't stand being in the apartment, where everything reminded her of her daughter. She decided to move to another city, and as the years passed, the lack of progress in the investigation slowly destroyed her. She stated that her only goal now was to see the closure of this case before it is her turn to pass away. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible, as a few weeks after the interview, she passed away from cancer at the age of 78. She was laid to rest next to her daughter. The girl that witnessed the abduction at the age of 12 also spoke out in an interview. Sandra said she had never stopped blaming herself for what happened to Debbie over the years. According to her, she believed that she could have stopped the suspect and prevented the abduction and murder of Debbie, even if it meant she became the victim herself. In 2019, the police department received additional funding, which enabled them to request a more detailed analysis of the young girl's clothing. This time, experts were able to extract a full DNA sample from it. Unfortunately, even with a full sample, their suspect's DNA wasn't in the FBI database. Debbie's father also gave an interview, and he shared that throughout the decades, not a day went by where he didn't think about his missing daughter. In fact, he kept a box of her photos, hoping to be reunited with his daughter in the afterlife. Unfortunately, in 2022, shortly after his interview, he passed away. That same year, detectives focused on the only lead they had, the DNA. They reached out to a company in Florida that specializes in an innovative DNA analysis method called genetic genealogy. The police gave them all of the biological samples they had collected over the decades and waited for the results. Experts in the company created a profile of the unknown man and began searching for any of his relatives in public genetic databases. They needed to find people who had uploaded their DNA because family members' genetic material has similarities. Modern tools can locate even distant relatives. After searching thousands of potential relatives of the suspect, investigators narrowed the search down to a family living in Marietta in 2023. They then asked the family for DNA samples, and they all agreed. The test showed that the assailant was one of their close relatives, so investigators looked into their family more closely. They found one family member that was the most likely suspect, a man named William Rose. However, he had taken his own life in 1974. This was only 2 years after Debbie's life was taken. Despite this, detectives were determined to finally close this case, no matter what. They obtained a warrant to dig up his grave, and experts took a DNA sample from his body. After 51 years, the police finally got a full DNA match. William Rose was a killer. At the time of the crime, he was only 24 years old and had never been a suspect. They found out that his relatives lived in the same building as Debbie and her family. William visited them frequently. So, detectives believe that he might have seen Debbie on multiple occasions before January 13th. That evening, he may have been visiting his relatives, but saw the young girl coming out of the laundromat and heading towards her home. The statements of Debbie's neighbors and other witnesses suggested William pulled into the parking lot between the laundromat and her house, left the car running, got out, grabbed the young girl, and then sped off. There's a chance he immediately went to the quarry, which was located in the direction he left. It should also be noted that William had not previous criminal record. Either he hadn't committed any serious crimes besides the young girl's murder, or he simply hadn't been caught. When the case was solved, the only close living relative of Debbie was her older brother, Melvin. He attended the press conference where they announced the discovery of the perpetrator, thanking everyone that had worked on Debbie's case. He said that he wished their mom could have seen this moment, but added that she was now in heaven with her young daughter.